land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's events. We have one more event coming up this week after this one. If you are interested in other virtual events, the ex-girlfriend of my ex-girlfriend is, I am immediately, of course, messing up that title, but you can definitely look it up on our page for Women and Children First. That is, our next event is on Sunday, also going along with our Pride events. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says Ask a Question, and you just hit that and you can type your question to Jamika and Kathie. If you want to buy the book, if you don't already have it, which I'm sure you already have it, it's a really, really great book. I loved it myself. I'm glad I got to read this. But if you don't already have it or you want to buy it for somebody, there's a little button at the bottom of the screen that says buy the book in green, and that way you can get it directly from the store. I think that that's it for now. I'm going to go on and hop out and hand it over to Kathie and Jamika. Again, thank y'all so much for joining this event with us. I'm so excited to listen to this discussion.
Awesome. How are you doing, Jamika?
I am fine. I'm super excited and very happy for everyone who's shown up, and special shout out to the people who are up at midnight on this side of the Atlantic. That's so awesome.
Yeah. Definitely. That's so cool to see.
Yeah.
We talked about how we've talked before. We've been fortunate because my work brings me to Paris from time to time to be able to stay in touch to some extent, even though we worked together roughly 30 years ago.
Oh my God! That long? When you put numbers on it.
That is when Women and Children first hired people who were only 5 years old.
My God, that's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, Women and Children First. Yeah, that's where I met you, actually, and it was a very important part of my life. Very important part of my life. I mean, especially during the early days of being a baby dyke, I was like, it was a great place to be politicized and learn and find all these beautiful books in one place, you know, and to be around people who are also had a certain way of thinking was also very, very good. And actually, it was the first place I ever performed at Women and Children First, once upon a time. Yeah.
That's cool. That's terrific. That's, you know, my experience of the store is similar, and we were roughly the same age, and it just opened a whole world for me. And you know, the books, amazing. But then also just the culture and the people and the clearinghouse of queer community that passed through there.
Exactly.
Access to the programming.
Exactly. And it's still going, and that's really amazing. And I want to give a shout out to, you know, Linda and Anne, if they're around, you know, hello. Maybe I'll get to see you in person one of these days.
Yeah, and Linda and Anne are definitely still around and are doing great. But let's hear a little bit of this amazing book of yours. Okay. It really is a terrific novel. I'm very excited to dig into it right away, and we'll hear a little bit, and then we can talk about it.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump right in here. I'm going to start at a point when Skye, our main protagonist, has first just landed in New York. To give you a little bit of background about her, she's like originally from the suburbs of Crickledown, Missouri, suburb of St. Louis. She lived in Chicago for a while, made her way to New York, and she's going to New York to catch up with Scottie, this mixed race guy that she met on the Greyhound bus on her way from St. Louis to Chicago. And so she has an address, but she's showing up unannounced. So we're going to start from there. Let's see. Okay. So she gets to the city, and now she's in front of the space, the address. Standing outside an old falling apart building somewhere on Avenue B, I checked the address Scottie had scratched in my journal months ago and rang the doorbell. There was no response. The door was held ajar with a brick, so I walked in up some squeaky metal stairs to what I thought was Scottie's apartment. Cobain's voice whined through the cracked door. But I swear that I don't have a gun. And I remember Scottie talking about the last time he was on a Greyhound, how he'd been with his New York roommate heading for Seattle. He went on about the grunge scene there and about hearing Nirvana rock before they sold out their sound and got famous. I walked in cautiously. This was New York, right? Who would leave the door open in this city? Then I remembered that Scottie, who nearly left his wallet on the bus, was probably the kind of person who would forget to lock the door. After all, he wasn't really from New York. As I entered the small, dusty studio, post-Port Authority angst gave way to excitement. Half expected to see the short-haired Randy Scottie having a rebound shag, but I was probably inviting an instant replay of the Damien story. Damien is her ex-boyfriend. What if Scottie was really a jerk? What if I ended up with no place to stay? At least this time I carried no expectations. I didn't care, convinced myself this was different and got ready for some innocent flirting. But instead, I was greeted by her, or rather not greeted by her, and my world fell apart. She didn't see me at first or hear my timid knock on the already open door. I walked into what could have been the TARDIS, as the room was larger than it appeared to be at the entrance. An open space, cracked black and white tiled floors and raftered ceilings. The walls were concrete. To my right, a part of the room was curtained off to create a makeshift bedroom. A sofa divided the rest of the room into two parts. Left of the sofa border, she stood, still apparently oblivious to my presence. Engrossed in what she was doing, her disheveled, dark, curly, dreading hair partially masked a determined face. She was pasting scrap paper of different sizes and shapes onto the white concrete wall, going at it so feverishly, I was afraid to interrupt. When I finally got her attention and asked for Scottie, she gave me a quick once-over, but otherwise seemed extremely disinterested. You can sit over there and wait if you want. She caught me noticing the open bowl of pot. The room reeked of it. Help yourself. Thanks. I sat down on the sofa, suddenly feeling a little awkward, trying for an aloof coolness. Despite my tenuous attempt at grace, my bag landed with a resounding thud by my sweaty boots. I was suddenly aware of their mellow stench as I clumsily shifted on the anorexic sofa. Scottie's roommate went back to her canvas. The sunlight blasted through the window, casting her shadow on the wall in front of her. She began to outline it with strips of paper carefully, then again with urgency. I picked up a half-smoked joint. No, roll your own, she said without looking at me. Woman had eyes in the back of her head. Sorry. The artist at work ignored me as I now, feeling as if I'd been caught stepping in shit, fumbled with the light as a butterfly all-natural papers. Didn't look up again until I'd finished twisting a pregnant joint, lit it with the light blue lighter that Scottie had given me. After inhaling a healthy amount of smoke and holding it, I strained against the urge to cough until it flew out on its own volition. At first, she seemed not to notice, but then sticking another scrap on the wall, she said, "That was 3 coughs. 3 coughs and you're off." And I was gone. Purple sweat glistened along her long neck. Light floated from her skin as she placed more and more paper, unsticking and replacing, sometimes ripping bits in half to fill a spot. Her wild head was spiked with electric strands of fractured white light. Wiry muscles pressed against brown, honey brown skin as she pushed against the wall. Her overalls just barely covered her clay brown nipples. Hands, lithe, precise. I let my eyes wander from her strong fingers to her dancer's biceps. There, uncoiling its metal tail, was the snake, the one I'd seen before as a kid. This time, its head turned and hissed, pointing its tongue in the direction of this strange and wonderful woman's work. Her paper sculpted shadow walked off the wall, and they waltzed to an orchestra of colors. The shadow's face was at first a phantom of someone familiar, then no face at all. Hey! Her face was 2 inches from mine. She grabbed the joint. Mortified, I felt saliva nearly dripping from the corner of my open mouth. Could do nothing about it. Hey, compadre, habla español. ¿Qué pasa bonito con ojos rojos? You were dancing with it. Sankara, I whispered more to myself. She looked at me long and hard before letting out a smoke-filled giggle. Yes! And just to prove it, she took an ink-sodden paintbrush and wrote across her paper-sculpted shadow, Sankara was here. She twisted the snake armlet on her bicep absent-mindedly. By the way, Scottie doesn't live here anymore. So that's the first reading that I'm going to do.
All right.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Oh my God, that was so good. I feel so lucky to be able to have heard you reading that. Can you hear me okay? Because
yeah, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. My regular mic's not on, so it must be picking it up off of my laptop. So as long as it's working, I'm not gonna fuck with it.
It's fine.
Okay. Great. So Jamika, first off, I'm so proud of you. I remember last year to City Drop It in Paris, you told me that this book was coming out. I was so thrilled. And so I do want to say congratulations on your book launch and offer you a toast.
Yes, I'll be in that toast. Cheers.
Of the French celebration. Cheers.
Mazel tov. Thank you.
So you set the book in 1992.
Yes.
A very specific, very unique setting.
Yes.
And some touchstones from that year are woven into the narrative. Obviously, you mentioned Nirvana, the music of that time, but also the Rodney King beating reappears as a cultural marker throughout the book. Why did you choose 1992 as a setting, and what significance does that have for the world of your story?
Well, 1992. Wow, because when I first started writing this book, it was in it's a long time. 2005. Okay, so at that time, I know for sure. Let's just look at 1992 as a historical moment. It was like off the back of the Berlin Wall falling, right? Then we had Nelson Mandela, who was freed, partially and thanks to a lot of protests going on all over America as well on university campuses, divestiture movements. And then not long after Mandela was freed, we see for the first time ever, well, not the first time ever, but we see Rodney King getting the mess beat out of him. This is public, so I could probably say shit or the fuck, but there you go, the mess, that was for my mom, beat out of him. And so there's many different things that come into play there. So there's that part, okay? 1992, there's a new kind of surveillance culture that's happening. There are more people who have like their own cameras suddenly. So we have people who can also videotape things. So suddenly we can see, like similar to what happened in the time of MKJ during his walks, Martin Luther King rather, excuse me. When we saw pictures of dogs, right? And some black and white footage. This time we had like someone with their own little video camera, who saw the event. And so therefore it hit a wide audience. So there's that, the surveillance culture. And meanwhile, in London at around the same time, there were more surveillance cameras than anywhere else in the world. In fact, in London, it's one of the first places that had surveillance cameras practically everywhere. So there's that part of it. And the other part of it had to do with what has been kind of a modus operandi for me since time. And that was to, through my work, document a certain the people that I hung with, the people that I understood, a kind of crew, a kind of scene that I moved through. And this is in the 90s, and I kind of felt like that there's been a kind of aerosol of amnesia, where a lot of the stuff that happened during that period, there were a lot of really groundbreaking artists. We were already talking about, we were like queer, and a lot of us did not really want to have any idea, stick to one definition of what we were. All these conversations were going on, and also across the Atlantic. Like there's artists like Juba Kamalaka and Kara Lynch, on this side, and then Stormy Weber that I met actually in London, along with some other thinkers who started this. It was like an American name, Yvonne Saunders. Yvonne Saunders Busan, I call her, and Michelle McKenzie, who created a Sauda, which was this place where people who were marginalized would get together and do their work. So all these things are happening, and also across the Atlantic. And I wanted to document that. You see what I mean?
That makes me think of, you wrote an essay, a beautiful essay for Literary Hub, the literary website, about your connection of the development of your work and Audre Lorde's Zami, to bring us back to books and our formative years as young artists, sure. Working at a bookstore. I would love if you could talk about that a little bit more, about the way that Lorde's work, and specifically Zami, informed your creative process, and also how it informed Skye Papers.
Yes. Audre Lorde, among a few other people during that time, was very necessary, and like a necessary validation. And she also, with Zami, creating this genre called biomythography, she created a platform for many artists and writers to express themselves in ways that were outside of male white-centered constructions, right? So for me personally, this idea of biomythography really spoke to me, the idea of myth, et cetera, et cetera. For her, what she did was combine biography, history, and fictionalizing her personal experience, right? To create this thing called myth, right? And this is basically what myths are made from: history, bio, fiction, right? And actually it comes from a trajectory of storytelling in the end of the day that is quite African, diasporically based. Anyway, so she created a kind of genre that allowed and also inspired me as someone who had the tendency I use a lot of different types of work. I'm a writer at base, but I use film, sound, music as an extension of my pen. And so it has always been something that's been very important to me. And the thing that she laid out kind of gave me, quote unquote, permission, or inspired me to learn how to mix those genres. I could keep talking, but I know time. We have to.
Yeah, and I know that we've talked separately about how in centering, in locating this particular narrative in 1992, that you are also allowing it to be mythologized.
Exactly. And I think, yeah. I mean, so the book for me, and a lot of the work that I've done is that it reflects things that I've gone through, lived, experienced, witnessed with others. But it's also, fantastic. I love using the fantastic and the surreal because it gives me it helps me get closer to a truth. Okay? Because memory is not always reliable, but there's always a truth. And I wanted to marry and bleed the surreal, right, with the real and the real, REEL, which I think is a bit like memory.
Memory actually plays a really important role in the story. And
yes.
Early on, really one of the instigators of the action that follows is that Skye realizes that her memory has been compromised, apparently from a too wild of a night out, that she has apparently blacked out from the previous night. And yet something still remains in her subconscious memory. And these cryptic clues emerge that tap into her subconscious. So can you talk about memory as a theme in your work?
Sure, I would love to do that. I just want to read this thing because it says, I'm just going to read one line from the book. It says, "That wasn't the only thing messing with my mind. Sometimes I felt like a character in somebody else's movie who was somehow missing the plot." Now, if you take that out of context, how many times has any of us felt that? To be honest, I mean, I think it's like, okay, there's many different ways to think about memory. Memory, personal memory, and also collective memory. The memory that's dictated to us by the dominant narrative. You know, memory within the genes, memory within water. You know, all of these things are kind of connected. And then I love Toni Morrison's version of rememory. That I have used a lot, because for me, that means kind of something coming back to the surface that has been subsumed or buried, you know, whether it be out of trauma or because of social situations, you know, social oppression. I've used memory in a lot of my work. For a long time, I've dealt with it. From memory tracks, something I did back in the 90s, where, you know, two women based in London go through the streets of Brixton and Portobello looking for the revolution. And in that case, I was speaking about memory of like a collective memory, like where's the revolution? What things are lost? What things, you know, just disappear? There's also the idea of memory being, wow, there's the collective part, and then there's the our own part. And I think memory is very attached to how we see ourselves and the world we live in, and in every moment, right? And what contributes to what James Baldwin calls systems of reality, right? And for me, systems of reality, or basically what that means is like how you negotiate the reality and your place in the reality that you're living in, right? And a lot of that has to do with our memory, our own personal memories of who we are, but also the stories that we're told. But I'm very interested also in the stories that we tell ourselves.
Something about that, I think, is that when you think of the story of 1992 that is collectively remembered,
yes,
oftentimes it's a story that can be about, the AIDS movement and activism to raise awareness about AIDS and ACT UP, and it can be about riot girls, like a kind of like the counterculture, uniformly white, uniformly perky, even though it's very important to a lot of young women at that time. And the story that you're telling isn't necessarily a part of that collective memory of 1992. If you were to quiz somebody about 1992, what do you know about it? It's not the first place they would go. That many people would go.
Exactly, because that's something that used to really aggravate me from even before, is that I was hanging around an eclectic group of people who were people of color. There was mixed, it was straight, there was gay, it was like in between, people who didn't want to identify as anything. And this was like the collective the collection of people that I hung out with. And what I found in my experience, that there was often women of color even who are starting these alternative scenes that are usually seen as things, or, in our popular culture, as you were saying, what most of us know about is the riot girls, which, I'm glad to see, but there was also polystyrene, motherfucker, before the riot girls, among many other people. You have Honeychild Coleman, for example, who is well into that. She's New York based, really great band, 1865. If you haven't heard it, check it out. Among a lot of people, including myself. Yes. So I think that what happens within culture is that it's always like our cultures, our marginalized cultures, are often subsumed within popular culture, which means a lot of the original people are erased, but in order to support a dominant narrative. Yeah.
You the short excerpt that you read and the your description of your work and the multimodality of your work. One of the structural devices of this book is that there are interspersed with the chapters are scripted action and camera shots. Just short little vignettes of scripted action put through, and through that it's insinuated that Skye is being watched. Skye is the main character of the story, although it's not always clear that that's reality. It's not always clear that that's truly what's happening.
That's the magic of it. Exactly. I did this on purpose. Because, like, I do believe, I have this in my own, I think as an artist, we have this way of sensing things. And there's definitely a thin line between, like, our intuition or the visions that we see and actual things that happen to inform us. And I really wanted to blur the line between these normally quite, this is real and this is Memorex, kind of. You have to be born in 1990. You have to be like, everybody knows that reference. Memorex. Is it real or is it Memorex? Silence. Nobody knows it. It doesn't matter. So is it real or is this tape? Anyway.
Right. And that's so with that sense of that there's actually a mystery. So this is very much a book of a specific culture and a specific time and a specific place, but at the heart of the story there's a mystery that's united by Skye's faulty memory and the clues coming through in her subconscious, and the question of, is somebody watching her, and if so, why? It calls into question whether Skye is actually a reliable narrator, and also, as you have already suggested, the nature between reality and surreality.
Yeah, exactly. But it's done on purpose, and it needs to be done. But I think that's kind of a state that we are in. And if I'm honest, I mean, like, look, even now, I mean, right now is even more obvious. There's so much stuff on surveillance culture and stuff like that. We are always being watched. And that's just the bottom line truth. We are, Now, whether there's a conspiracy behind it or not, I'll leave that up to you and your own imagination. But I really intended to do that because I don't want to give too much away about the book because I imagine most of the people haven't read it yet. So I'm going to leave it there. And also
there's a mystery.
This character Sinkara as well. Exactly. This psychedelic character Sinkara is also a part of what's real and what's not real. And eventually you'll find that the line is so very thin.
There's an existential mystery at the heart of this. Of this book, but to find out what the solution is, you're going to have to read the book.
Exactly.
So, Jamika, I would love, we have time, and I would love if we could hear a little bit more of the book.
Okay, so how much time do I have left to read so we can leave time for
maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll have the last 20 minutes for audience questions. So if people have questions about anything that you've heard in this conversation, questions for Jamika, questions about the content, you can post it in the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen. I will leave the screen so that Jamika can be front and center as she reads from her work.
Okay. So now, Skye is in London, and she's been there for a while, and it's starting to wear off the whole novelty of being in another place and being broke. I just, as I've got 10 minutes, I'm going to read just this little part, and then I'll explain some more. So, with dusk scraping its eyelid across the sun, I hid behind my shades and hood, numb to everything. Walking down those London roads, streets, ways, highways, closes, and squares, I realized that it was the same old, same old. Body and psyche know when you're in an unfamiliar place. Perception snaps are real. Senses are heightened. Psychic antennae reach out and search for some crevice, groove, or nuance of the known. Not necessarily the familiar, but the eternally known. It's an exchange. The landmarks, bent signposts, potholes, worn-in pavements, white walls tagged in spray paint and indelible super nib markers, they give you an idea of where you are, a reference point, and your psychic antenna places their own mark there each time you pass, each time some significant or insignificant moment is experienced there. So I wanted to ground it in that. So she's walking down the street. I have to cut it up a bit so we have time, because I could read forever. And heading back to the trash palace, this is the squat she lives in. And then she hears some jazz coming from someplace, and she follows her nose to the jazz. And it's a bookshop called the Marcus Soul Food Bookshop. It's a Black-owned bookshop on Marcus Garvey Road. And there's jazz musicians jamming with poets. She goes in and she listens and she sticks around until there's a break just before the open mic. And this is where I'm going to start. Okay. So she's scanning the books and stuff at this moment. Conversation, a low rumble, ebbing and flowing around me. I realized I wasn't the only person there on my own. Avoided one man's eyes as he nodded, making his way toward me, and continued scanning the bookshelf stuffed with Black literature. I wasn't in the mood to make polite or political conversation, so I headed for the toilet. Somebody's feelings might get hurt. Those of the Melanin Nation weren't always allies. You could be diminished under the interrogative eye questioning your realness. In Chicago, I had been excited to finally meet other conscious Black, brown-skinned folks. Others who opposed imperialistic slavery posing as the American dream. Being in that bookshop clear across the Atlantic reminded me of Damien and the Black consciousness meetings he had with his brothers. Had a similar atmosphere, but different. Damien's meetings had been dominated by a bunch of ego-induced Black power rantings. The few women there were introduced as the girlfriends of brother so-and-so. They sat there saying little or nothing. The boys went on about a number of Black male revolutionaries, how the man killed their men, their leadership, their positive role models. At the time, I was jazzed to hear so much dialogue around Black history, but felt invisible. We have to learn from our leaders before us, brothers, Damien had said, licking his lips the way he did when he was about to put his saxophone in his mouth or make a point. We have to strengthen ourselves because the Black man is an endangered species, especially the conscious Black man. I couldn't hold it down. And we should also learn from our sisters, right? Silence. I continued. Black women, revolutionaries like Angela Davis, Assata Shakur, hell, Harriet Tubman was revolutionary, an activist. The brothers looked at me like I'd clearly missed the point. And Damien seemed embarrassed. Assata who? Baby, Black women pose no threat to the man. He uses her against us. Damien corrected me. It was Rodney King, not Rhonda King, that got beat down by the pigs. Remember that. I checked the room to see if the lips of the other women were forming words of protest. They looked down and away. Damien closed the meeting, asking if anyone wanted a beer. I looked up at Damien in disbelief. How could he treat me like that? This was not the guy I horsed around with in Crickle Down. This was not the guy who spoke to me as his equal in debates of everything from passive resistance to extraterrestrial life forms. Damien gave me my first copy of Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm X, and it whetted my appetite for more, sent me on a search to find the women revolutionaries. The boy who encouraged me to open my mind was now a Black man engaging in a dick war with the man, and had just effectively shut me down. I was amazing in Missouri, but invisible in Illinois. I was revolutionary material in St. Louis, but Uncle Tom in Chicago. I stopped talking to him about my visions and sharing my writing, and he stopped talking to me, period, about anything real. Patronized me as if I were no more than his woman. He even had the nerve to walk over and peck me on the cheek after the last meeting that I would ever be present for again. Came to a close. You want a beer, baby? I nodded my head anyway and watched as Damien went to join his brothers. And my sisters had their backs to me now, talking among themselves. I was thinking for 2 seconds about joining them when I overheard, "Who does she think she is anyway, talking that white feminist malarkey? And what about our sisters?" One of them sneered, mimicking me. "She needs to get her priorities straight. They are murdering our men out there." I decided to head for the girls' room instead, went in and did what I always did, studied my face and whispered, "Yeah, still here, but what am I doing here?" And soul food books. I walked out of the toilet I'd escaped to and looked for a back door. Wanted to leave before I found myself stepping in it. But the back door was locked and the only way out was right next to the stage. Slipped my journal in my back pocket and made my way through the thickening crowd of largely black faces. I was near the stage, brushing past the tight audience, and I felt my journal jostle a bit, but was in such a hurry to get out, I didn't bother to push it firmly back into my pocket. Seconds before my hand reached the doorknob, I heard the journal hit the floor with a fat thump. Damn! I succeeded in doing exactly the opposite of what I intended to do. Eyes were on me. Having trouble getting volunteers, the MC scanned the crowd. Her adept eye caught me fumbling with my journal. "You, with the book," she said, waving me up. "You look like you have something to say." There was no spotlight, but I felt heat shooting through my crown, turning my face into a sweaty mass. The MC smiled at me and teased, "Looks like there are a lot of words in that book. Are you a poet or not? Maybe you're a poet and didn't even know it." The drummer did a rat-a-tat splash, and some folks in the crowd laughed. "Don't be afraid. It's a safe place," she said in a loud whisper to me, her hand outreached. As much as I wanted to dash, it seemed wrong to leave her hanging. Before I knew it, she managed to get me behind the mic. I opened the bent notebook to a page I knew well. Still, it took me a minute to catch air. I began almost inaudibly, throat swollen shut, hands shaking, but visibly shaking. Throat swollen shut, hands slightly, but visibly shaking the book in my hand. Homogenized, colonized, and sold as advertised. The revolution is now. A sleek new car with revolutionary gas mileage. The revolution is now. Edited for your viewing pleasure on the national news with Big Brother having big stick peace talks. My bomb is bigger. Making the world safe for democracy and revolutionary soap pop. My eyes didn't leave the pages, and as I picked up steam, the drummer found a place in my cadence to drop rhythm. The sax came in and out with 5-note scales. Rumor has it, Uncle Sam fucked Bessie Ross, though many still insist that America is an immaculate conception founded on some white man's freedom of expression. Beginning to feel carried by the sounds, I resisted looking directly into the eyes of onlookers. Except for some shy glances, I was focused on something way beyond. Midway through now, the journal found its home in my back pocket, and I chanted the rest of the piece from memory. I lost myself in the awe of it all. I'd gone to another realm, a place that felt as right as any right place I'd ever felt. And that kind of right was rare. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And how many young homies wearing the Malcolm X hat really know where the revolution at? Where the revolution at? The sax trailed off a line of notes, chasing the text to an ending, and I parachuted back to earth on that stage in front of all those faces. The room was silent. Claps came slowly, hesitantly, like scattered pops of a firecracker. That's it, I thought, time to sail. I jumped off the stage and exhaled. The next poet was introduced, An excruciating self-consciousness enveloped me. Pulled out my tobacco to make a cig, headed for the exit. Definitely needed air like smoggy skies need rain to clear my mind and escape the curious glances. Pushed through the door and lit my narrow fluted rollie. That's it. I keep going. That's it. I'm gonna stop there. I'm about to read the whole book to you guys. What up?
I just love that whole excerpt so much. And again, it's just it's so much more hearing you read it. And in that text, something that really struck me was the we talked about surveillance, about being watched, and as a sort of metaphor, but also as a reality. And then you talk about the interrogative eye of realness, as it were, and how we're in this gaze to assess whether or not we're worthy of our identities.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's something that it's worth talking about, how we can like ostracize even people that were supposed to be a part of our communities by putting up these code books of what it means to be Black. I mean, back, for example, and what's not Black enough, all that kind of stuff. I think there should always be a space for being open to be able to have conversations. And this thing it's not always easy to do that. It's not always easy to do that, but it's necessary. Yeah.
So we're open for audience questions. If there's a way to see that people have posed questions in the question box, I don't see it. So I'll either wait to see if something happens with that, or we can just keep talking until somebody
asks a question.
The plate, right?
Okay.
But yeah, one of the things that you talk about wanting to thanks for the feedback on the question. One of the things that you talk about here is that is this sort of vanguard culture of queer, a sort of queer, multicultural, but certainly a Black-centered culture of arts and art making that happened in the early 90s, and it makes me think about how we create our own cultures out of necessity. We find our people out of necessity to make culture happen, and that feels like something that you're recording in this book here. Is that part of your experience?
Can you rephrase the last part of the question? What's part of my experience? That we get together to make culture happen? Yes. Okay, I get it. Yeah, I mean,
that's where I'm going.
Yeah. I mean, this is we are the creators of these things. I think that basically there's what happens all the time is that you have these marginal, I hate words sometimes, but marginal communities that create things out of necessity in order to create spaces where we can be together and express ourselves, show our work, create something different and new. And then it becomes something, someone picks it up, and within the consumerist culture it becomes a little bit popular, and then the consumerist culture picks it up and then reifies it. And as a result of this, once it becomes kind of commercial, we end up losing a lot of the original sources, because it doesn't fit with the, again, words, dominant narrative.
There's a theme in the book about the uncomfortable intersections between art making and capitalism and commerce. That tie into this idea that you're talking about right now. Is that something that you intentionally put into the book?
I mean, the book, there definitely that's in there. I mean, the artists that we're looking at in Skye Papers, they're squatting a place. They're unemployed, basically. They don't, getting a job and all that. Some of it's slightly by choice, and some of it's slightly by circumstance. And I believe that within this situation, I keep getting distracted by the notes I see on the slide. But in this situation, I mean, do you sell? Is it a sellout that if you can make money off of your work? You know, I mean, that's a question. Does it mean that you're a success if you make money off your work? That's another question. What does success mean? I mean, I think when you're younger, when you're a young artist, you are maybe starting to figure out the reasons why you're doing the work, you know, and hopefully you can hook up with people who can support you. But there's always this capitalistic pressure that definitely posits success in a certain kind of monetary gain. So when people ask you, they're like, so what do you do? I'm an artist. But what do you do to make money? You know, that says everything, just that particular thing.
So there are two questions coming through right now. And one is to kind of contextualize or speak more about the idea of reifying and what you mean by that specifically. And then I'll go to the other questions.
Okay, so reifying is like when you take, it's basically making something that would be marginal or not necessarily a part of the consumer's culture and making it something that's a consumable. Black bodies are reified all the time, for example. So that's basically that. And I think, you know, I wrote this piece called Fluid Code recently, and it always has been a kind of theoretical obsession with me to try and figure out how to create a language, alternative language that would miss the detection of the reificating machine. So as we're like becoming, you know, talking radically about things, you know, like I'm going to go all the way back to the 60s, like well before I was born, you know, where, oh, we're saying give peace a chance. And then it became a t-shirt, right? And then it lost the same kind of power. You know what I mean? So how do we create a language that supersedes that is more fluid, that we still get the same understanding, we get the same force, so we can continue the force and miss the detection of the reificating machine?
Ruth asks another question where they ask, fascinating how you confront the bro thing of a certain era in a queer language. Well, queer, I don't know if that's the word, but you confront the place where Angela Davis left off, saying she wasn't going to be the woman in the kitchen for the bros, but you go further. You want the right to be a poet and a revolutionary.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, of course. But then, like, it seems to me like, in what place is that? Doesn't it seem normal? I mean, I feel like it's normal. Why shouldn't I be a poet and a revolutionary and a cook if I want to be? You know, it's only what society tells us that we're supposed to fit into these little buckets or these categories. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but I know that we're socialized into thinking in certain ways, and it's a lifelong journey. You know, it's a lifelong journey. I have to give thanks to other writers and authors and artists that came before me that encouraged that thought, you know, encouraged that kind of thought process, and I can only hope that I can leave stuff behind to do the same for others. You know, as a part of it, of doing the work.
Speaking of work, Wayne has a question, which is that Wayne wants to know whether there are any plans for an audiobook. If hearing you read excerpts has been awesome, how much more awesome would it be to hear you read the whole thing? Acknowledging that it's a pain in the butt to do so, though. So a flat no is totally understood.
Wayne, I love you.
Have you been talks about an audiobook?
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks, Camille. I got your thing. I just have to let it know. Hey, Juanita, my sister, cool. Yes, Wayne. I think, okay, nothing is written in stone yet, but there will be an audiobook. Whether I'm reading it or not is I'm not sure yet. We're going to figure that out, you know, because they've got their professional people, but you're not the first person who said, you should read it. And that's like a whole nother job, my friend. It is a whole nother job.
Although I think I'm one of the people here.
I will pass it on. Huh?
I think I'm one of many people here who are on Team Jamika Read It.
How many want me to read it? Everybody. I will say that. I will bring it up and see. Thanks. Yeah, okay, cool, 100%. Okay, everybody. All right. Yeah, okay. Okay. I'm gonna take it to the audiobook people and see what they say. Brilliant. Okay.
Well, I think
All
that
right. Yeah, I
the
get
fact
1,000
that
sound
you're
condenses.
the
Awesome.
fact that you're already a performer and a performance poet and a musician and a singer, I think that James Baldwin credits the cadence, the very familiar and very Baldwinian cadence of his work through the fact that he was trained as a Baptist
orator.
preacher.
Yeah.
And how much do you think that your experience as a singer, as a musician, and a performer has impacted your voice in crafting prose?
Oh, but of course it has. I mean, these are like the primary ways that on a regular basis that I've expressed myself. I mean, I have been writing short stories, and I also write like genre essay, academic essays, but definitely that's in there. But I think that's always been a part of me, like in every kind of storytelling method, whether I use film and video, film or sound or music, there's this kind of internal rhythm that I have, and I'm a very visual person. So I can see it, I can hear it, I can smell it. So most definitely. And my experience, like many years, I've been on the road, like with bands in Zile for 20 years, which is a French dub band. I have my own band, Jamika and the Argonauts. We're going to have an album promo. We're going to have an album coming out pretty soon called Rebooted. Really great. I'm so happy about it. Anyway, so yeah, that definitely has informed my writing, but then it's like a mixed bag. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg? You see what I mean?
Yeah, that it's all just an extension of your creative voice.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very important because part of my theory, part of my philosophy around, trying to challenge genres, like the defining definitive lines between genres, or the definitive lines between how we identify, or definitive lines around our systems of reality and the stories we tell ourselves. It's also reflected in the practice.
Are there any further questions?
I see a question from Sonia. Says, how do you code switch between academic and more popular accessible language? She wrote it in the other comments, not in the question box.
Oh, okay, got it.
You see it? Yeah, I actually, that dance, it's not a conscious thing or like a technique. It's just, I think something that I intentionally employed because, okay, I've gotten as far as my master's, whatever, didn't get to the PhD, but I've given a lot of what I call anti-lectures. And I think it's all the philosophy behind that. I wrote a piece called Multiverse where I speak about the philosophy behind the anti-lecture. And it's about destroying or blurring the line of ownership of knowledge, one. Thinking about knowledge in a way that could also be not just rationally understood, but something that is a knowing that's intuitive. So it was always important to me to make stuff that's a little bit academic but accessible, because I also know that my grandmother probably said something that Derrida said much more simply. I mean, all you have to do is read Zora Neale Hurston, like Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick, which I'm reading right now. And read some of the old wisdom. A lot of this stuff is there. So the code switching, yeah, it depends on how you're doing it. Like the reason, because I'm an artist who's an academic, but an artist, then I don't have to like worry about that so much. I have the quote unquote permission to do it. But to be honest with you, at the beginning, I did used to get a little bit of like, from the academic side, they're like, you're not really academic enough. From the artist side, why are you trying to be all academic? You know, but times are changing anyway.
Yeah, but I think that that's also something, you know, from the dominant power paradigms that say that a woman scholar, or you know, presumptively a person of color who's a scholar, has an obligation, expectation that they're not taken seriously if they're not speaking in jargon.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And so I was kind of like that. So I would use the quotes, but then go, huh? Because I think it's necessary. You have to just take the leap. And then you find people going, oh my God, that's so cool. How'd you do that? You know? Yeah.
Do you read
Because
out loud when you're editing?
if a white guy does it, it's like, oh my God, that is so brilliant. That is just so mind opening. That's so genre building. When a black girl woman does it, it's like, we're not in the ghetto. We're not like doing this whole feminist thing. We're kind of like, yeah, can you just like kind of, you know, anyway. But, you know, we can break that shit down. Let's break it down.
Do you read your work out loud when you're editing it?
Do I read my stuff out loud when I'm editing? Most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah. It's like so necessary to read it out loud to get the cadence, the rhythm, and also to see if it makes sense. Because the way it sounds in your head is not the way it sounds, you know, when you actually speak it. Yeah, for sure.
I find that to be true.
Yes, I thought so. I'm looking forward to your book as well coming out. I know we're not talking about you, but, you know, just give me
We're not
that.
talking about me. This is all about you. But, I want to say that I'm extremely grateful that you produced this work of art that I think is something that does merit more than one read. It's a fun read. Like, I wouldn't hesitate to say that it's a beachy page turner, but it also brings these really, really important questions about you know, what it is to be art making, and you know, what it means to make community, and the you know, the role that memory plays in our lives, and the uncomfortable juxtapositions between commerce and art making, and the compromises that we make. And there's all of this is there.
Yes.
And it's done in such a deft way that you might not know that you're engaging in those interrogations until you're like, holy shit, man.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, good. I'm very happy. I worked very hard on it, and I am very proud of this book, I must admit, you know, because especially when I hear from people who are like, you say to me, they feel seen, because that's like, yeah, that's exactly part of what that's about. And before I finish, I want to say, before I forget, also want to give thanks to, you know, big ups to the feminist press, because they're like, awesome. They did a really good job, a really fucking good job. So I just wanted to put that out there. Right. Really, really great,
so
man. I'm jazzed, and thanks for everyone who showed up, man. I really appreciate that.
I'm jazzed too. I hope that everybody gets the opportunity to read this book and pass it along to their friends.
Yes. Bravo.
That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I'm so glad I got to be a part of this and hear you speak in this book. Oh, I love this book. Everybody else, I know you're saying you love the book too. You can buy the book in this little green button below. You can also come into the store. Our store is open if you're in Chicago. If you're not in Chicago, find your local independent bookseller and get Jamika's book. And if they don't have it, then tell them that they should. It's Pride Month. That's homophobic. We just had Juneteenth. It's also racist. So come on. So thank you so much for coming. Y'all have a great one.
Yeah, you got to close now. Okay. Are you going to send the link to the recording?
Yes, thank you for that reminder. If you registered, you should get the recording tomorrow.
Okay.
And otherwise, it'll be up on our YouTube in 2 days. So anybody can watch it anytime.
Okay, great. Nice one. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ariel. Thank you, Women in Children First, and thank you, Jamika, for inviting me.
Thank you, Kathie, and thank you, Ariel.
I'm very honored.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.